Hello and merry meet. I'm Lady Tahila from the Coven of the Open Mind, and you're watching Wicca and Witchcraft 101. This is our final lecture, Lecture 18. We're still talking about postmodern topics. We're still in Chapter 9. This time we're going to talk about the divine persona, what it means to be a fully realized witch, or any kind of spiritual person, really. Everyone has a divine persona. But we in Wicca make our divine persona witchy. First, I just want to go on and talk a little bit about the different traditions, different lineages, different kinds of covens, different ways that people practice Wicca and witchcraft. And then I'll talk a little bit about the Open Minded Wicca, which is our sect, our way of doing things. And then I'll dive into the divine persona specifically and talk about what it is and how you find yours, or come to realize who your higher self is. How do you bridge the gap between your fleshy self and your transcendent self? We're also going to talk about how to craft your own traditions in case you're in a place where traditional Wicca doesn't really work for you. Like if you don't have 8 seasons in a year, you have a dry and a wet season, maybe you'll have different holidays, maybe you'll adapt to use different flora and fauna for your area so that you can find your tools in nature, which is more powerful than ordering stuff online, even if you're using substitutions and your own way of doing things. To get us started, let's talk about something that's called British traditional Wicca. British traditional Wicca are the sects that come from the classic era. They are traditions that have been around since the founding of Wicca. Gardnerianism is the oldest. Alexandrianism is a hive, an offshoot off of that. And so is Seax Wicca, which came to America and became more American. Some consider it to be British traditional, some consider it to be American Wiccan, but it is an offshoot of British traditional Wiccan, which means that its founder, Buckland, was initiated into a Gardnerian coven and then left to go form his own lineage. So something is considered an offshoot of Gardnerianism if the founder was Gardnerian, initiated into a Gardnerian coven. Now, in order to be considered Gardnerian, you have to actually initiate into a Gardnerian coven. They guard their secrets well, so even while you can find the Gardnerian Book of Shadows published, and we're going to read a bunch from different books today and really learn more about the different traditions, you still can't claim lineage in Gardnerianism unless you've initiated, because they have a very rigorous way of training people. And they say, if you were trained as Gardnerian witch, you were trained as an Alexandrian witch, you would not do things any other way. You would not do an eclectic ritual. Like, the training is so rigorous, and you have to copy from the Coven Book of Shadows. So your own Book of Shadows is basically a copy of theirs, but in your own understanding, or your own words a little bit, maybe from here and there. You'll add your own stuff. You'll write your own results of different spells, but for the most part, it's almost a direct copy. And it does get diluted from generation to generation. Every time a coven hives, it can dilute the original source a little bit or alter it a little bit. But yeah, it's really a very standard practice, these more traditional groups that require initiation. Gardnerianism is fairly hermetic, but there is a focus on ritual magic, but it's also got a large focus on divinity within nature, and using candles and spells, using cauldrons, creating herb blends and incense blends and oils yourself from materials you grow yourself. That's particularly important in Gardnerian Wicca. Ritual for initiates is done skyclad usually, but in modern covens, they often will give an initiate a set of robes and use robes. But traditionally, and in the most traditional circles, it's done skyclad. Initiates are bound to the altar. There's like a specific way in which they're supposed to be bound, and they are scourged as well. The dagger is used oftentimes more than the sword, especially in American Gardnerianism. But sometimes you'll see they use the sword. And the scourge is usually like an actual scourge. That's like a tool that has little whiplets on it. They work with Carninos and Aridia. and they do a lot of Old English, a lot of very eloquent, difficult to pronounce speech. A lot of memorization is involved, but they do sometimes bring in a Book of Shadows to ritual with them, especially if they're doing public rituals, which are more eclectic. If they're doing a circle for their outer court and everyone is allowed to attend, then they're probably not using the things that they know really well and definitely have memorized, the things that they keep more secret. And the classic symbol they would use is a pentagram. Most of them wear pentagram necklaces. And that's Gardnerian. Alexandrian, which is an offshoot, so it's similar. It's very hermetic, however, has a strong emphasis on ritual magic. It's more compatible with city life. It's less about finding your own tools in nature or growing your own herbs. They will do that. You know, they're still witches, but it's just less important. And they work with a Gaulish pronunciation of Cernunnos. Cernunnos is the Gaelic pronunciation. They work with Carnena, and Aradia still. Okay, so for Alexandrianism, think a lot of Hebrew words, lots of Kabbalah is involved. Definitely have to learn the Kabbalah to be an Alexandrian witch. Though they learn the Hermetic Kabbalah, it's not very authentic. Even the Farrars, Alexander's own students, wrote, and I will read an excerpt saying as much, about how he stole a lot from other sources and didn't care that much if it was authentic or not. It's very big on the idea of if it works, right? So it doesn't matter if it's authentic, whatever, just take what serves you and leave the rest. All of that is very Alexander's influenced mentality. Alexander's wore Star of David instead of a pentagram, so he believed in the 6-pointed star more than the 5-pointed. And they do a lot of cord magic. That's more common than candle magic. They do use candles, especially elevated candle holders, as opposed to the smaller spell candles that are in holders just sitting on the altar. A lot of times they'll have the kind that's elevated up off the altar, and then long, big tapers, big, huge candles. I'll show you some pictures in a second. They use the sword much more commonly than the dagger. The cauldron is less common of a symbol. They don't put the cauldron on the altar very often. The chalice is often a center point on the altar, and it can resemble a cauldron in how they'll use it for like water scrying or, as a symbol of transformation. And they may not even put a cauldron on the altar even for Samhain. Some of them do. It's very varied even amongst these traditions. These are just generalities. They also do initiation skyclad. They also require initiation to be considered Alexandrianism, and they use the whip instead of a scourge, an actual whip, usually. Now, Cardell, we mentioned, he's one of the founders of Wicca. He did have a founding tradition that was very influential, but he never published, he never authored, he never spoke, he was very secretive, and so are most of his members. So we don't know anything about his tradition or what it may have looked like or how it compared to these, but I assume that it's probably something similar, but his own version of it, as he was someone who researched Hermeticism a bit as well. But he was also a lineage witch who learned most of his tradition from his parents or grandparents. I can't remember. So he probably did do a lot of things differently in his own way. And I think that is part of the diversity in Wicca that we see today. Okay, so this week I want to do some reading from some of the books that are the further reading that I suggest if you really want to be a Wiccan leader and you're a solitary and you're not taking a real course or initiating into an existing coven, definitely do all the further reading and get to know Wicca very intimately well. One of the further readings is the Gardnerian Book of Shadows. This was published by Gerald Gardner in the 50s and then redacted and then republished. So I don't know if he wanted people to read it or not, but it exists, and so I read it. And I just wanted to flip through and show you some examples of the kinds of phrasing that you could expect, right? So when he casts the circle, he says that people should say it like this. They should say, you touch the water with the athame in order to consecrate the water, and you say, I exorcise thee, O creature of water, that thou cast out from thee all the impurities and uncleanliness of the spirits of the world of phantasm, so they may harm me not, in the names of Aradia and Cernunnos. Very eloquent, very, flowy, poetic phrasing, right? So that's the kind of thing you can expect in Gardnerianism. Here's another example. So the charge. Okay, so his initial charge, this has been revised and reworked so many times, but one of his charges is that the magus would say, so the magus was what he called the high priest, or the male who initiates the ritual proceedings. And then it was the high priestess who actually channeled the goddess into herself. And he believed that both roles were necessary. It's not clear if he ever drew down the goddess himself, but he definitely viewed it like a man does most of the ritual work and the goddess is someone who interfaces, and the high priestess is someone who interfaces with the goddess and is not a leader, but instead is divine in their own way and is necessary to do magic. So he was still kind of sexist, which we talked about last time. And that's why you see that. So he would have the magus would say, listen to the words of the great mother who of old was also called among men Artemis, Astarte, Dione, Melusine, Aphrodite, Caridwen, Diana, Arianrod, Brid, and many other names. And then the high priestess would say, while channeling the goddess, so after having brought down the goddess, the high priestess would say, at mine altars the youth of Lacedaemon in Sparta made due sacrifice. Whenever ye have need of anything, once in a month, and better it be when the moon is full, ye shall assemble in some secret place and adore the spirit of me, who am queen of all witcheries and magics. There ye shall assemble, ye who are fain to learn all sorcery, yet have not won its deepest secrets. To these I will teach things that are yet unknown, and ye shall be free from slavery. And as a sign that ye be really free, ye shall be naked in your rites, both men and women, and ye shall dance, sing, feast, make music, and love all in my praise. There is a secret door that I have made to establish the way to taste even on earth the elixir of immortality. Say, let ecstasy be mine and joy on earth given to me. For I am a gracious goddess. I give unimaginable joys on earth, certainty, not faith, while in life. And upon death, peace unutterable, rest and ecstasy, nor do I demand aught in sacrifice. So, flowy, kind of old Englishy, with the ye's and the thees and the thous. It is basically the retelling of the same charge of the goddess that's found printed in Aridia. He also left out most of the Christian hate we do from our own charge of the goddess and the Open Minded path. However, his statement is less ordered than ours, and it's more kind of prosy. It's likely they had a different version of it that was memorized, that was kept secret, and that this is just a version of it. But there's no way to know for sure of that, unless, I guess, if you were part of one of these initial covens, feel free to comment on my video. That would be amazing. But, in the first degree initiation, he talks about how they must respond with perfect love and perfect trust. I have two passwords: perfect love and perfect trust. And then the magus drops the sword point. They hold a sword to the breast and make them say that, how do they come to the circle? And then he says, all who approacheth with perfect love and perfect trust are doubly welcome. And then they would be blindfolded and bound and carried, or rather led to the altar, where they would be bound to the altar as well. And then the initiation would proceed from there. And there's a whole bunch more stuff that they would do after that. And you could always read this whole thing for yourself if you're interested. Another thing that they used to like to do in Gardnerian Wicca, I'm not sure if they still do today or not, it hasn't been my experience with them, but I've also only attended outer court rituals. They would lead chants that involve, like, basically nonsense words. I don't know why he thought this was a real language, or what language he thought this was, or if he just made it up, or if it's like loosely based on Akkadian or something. But he would say things like Echo, Echo, Azarak, Echo, Echo, Zamalak, Bazabi, Lacha, Bakabi, Lama, Kahi, Akababe, Karel Yos, Lamek, Lamek, just like chanting this kind of thing, or have it be like a call and repeat kind of thing. An example of like calling upon the Lord of Shadows for like a November Eve type ritual, he would say, dread Lord of the Shadows, God of life and the giver of death, yet is the knowledge of thee the knowledge of death. Open wide, I pray thee, thy gates through which all must pass. Let our dear ones who have gone before return this night to make merry with us. And when our time comes, as it must, O thou, the comforter, the consoler, the giver of peace and rest, we will enter thy realms gladly and unafraid. For we know that when rested and refreshed among our dear ones, we shall be born again by thy grace and the grace of the Great Mother. Let it be in the same place and the same time as our beloved ones, and may we meet and know and love them again. Descend, we pray thee, upon thy servant and priest, so-and-so, whatever name. So that's how they would invoke the spirits of the dead into a person. So that is another example of how they might speak in Gardnerian rituals. Just a lot of Old English, a lot of very flowy, eloquent language. I marked a few more pages here, but I think you get the gist of it. So that's enough. So that's Gardnerian Wicca. And Alexandrian Wicca, mostly we learn about from the Farrars, who were Alexander's students. This is Stuart and Janet Farrar wrote this book, What Witches Do, at the bequest of Doreen Valiant, because she was trying to get people to keep Wicca alive after Gardner passed, and encouraging people to author books and share their practices with the world. So some of the information I wanted to share from this book, Maxine, who was Alexander's wife, she was also an important figure to them. And, this is the Farrars talking about some of these people who, they knew, who they knew personally and who were peers of their leaders in Coven, people that today seem like legendary figures almost for how much influence they had over the world. But she wrote, I would no longer rank Sanders above Gardner or alongside Levi or Crowley as I did on page 167, but for a few turbulent years, he fulfilled a real function in the movement. He set our feet on a path which many have never regretted, and performed the same function for many others. So we remember him with affection. Maxine said to us recently, I am sometimes asked, was Alex a genuinely powerful magician or a charlatan? My answer has to be both. Showman and magician to the last. He even managed to die on May Eve. So Alex Sanders was well known for being very dramatic and having very dramatic, very emphatic rituals that made people really feel the magic in their souls as they happened. And another part that I wanted to read, where is it? Over on this page, the Farrars write, to put the record straight, I must point out a couple of his failings. First, he had romanticized his own past to the point where I think he believed in the fantasy himself. His story that he copied his Book of Shadows from his grandmother simply cannot be true. Alex's Book of Shadows is the Gardnerian one, as it was finalized by Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiant together in the 1950s, long after Alex was a grown man. How Alex got hold of it, or somewhat inaccurately copied it, remains a mystery. But having acquired it, he used it to found his own coven and the Alexandrian movement. And Alex Sanders is a person who failed to be accepted into at least one Gardnerian coven, but probably more than one, because he was a very dramatic person. And I just think that a lot of people didn't think he was serious about it. Like they thought he was like LARPing or something. Not that they would have called it that back then. But that's just very interesting. And I like to hear when people talk about these people as people. I just think that's fascinating personally and well worth reading and understanding. Now, here is a way in which they might call forth the circle or do some kind of energy generation together. And this is what became the Witch's Rune, which is a popular song by S.J. Tucker. And there's many versions of it by other artists. And this is probably the original printing of it. It goes, darksome night and shining moon, east, then south, then west, then north. Hearken to the Witch's Rune. Here I come to call thee forth. Earth and water, air and fire, wand and pentacle and sword, work ye into my desire, hearken ye unto my word. Cords and censer, scourge and knife, powers of the witch's blade, waken all ye unto life, come ye as the charm is made. Queen of heaven, queen of hell, horned hunter of the night, lend your power unto my spell, and my work and work my will by magic right. By all the power of land and sea, by all the might of moon and sun, as I do will, so mote it be, chant the spell, and it is done. And then they still did some chanting of made up words, probably, saying echo, echo, Azarak, echo, echo, Zimalak, echo, echo, Karnena, echo, echo, Aradia. So these are, I guess, supposed to be names of the deities. Azarak and Zimalak are not deities names that I recognize from any cultural source, but that's fine. Like, that doesn't matter, right? So you can name your deities whatever you want. So that's something they may have done, chanting it together, going around the circle, raising energy. It seems to be some kind of quarter calling. I'm not sure if that's how it was used or if it was just to generate energy. Again, there's a lot of secrecy in these traditions. So unless you're really a part of one, and even then, there's no way to know how much the modern version is like the originals. But you can get an idea from reading some of these books. And this is What Witches Do by the Farrars, Stuart and Janet Farrar. Okay, so another thing I wanted to read was down here. So when the maiden, when the High Priestess is being blessed with the kiss, some of the phrasing they might use before they do the fivefold blessing would be something like, of the mother darksome and divine, mine the scourge and mine the kiss, the 5-point star of love and bliss, here I charge you in the sign. And then the goddess, the High Priestess would assume the goddess position, and then they would do the fivefold blessing, exactly like it's written in the Gardnerian Book of Shadows or some similar variation of that. All very similar stuff to what we do in our own rituals, because I am very traditional for a solitary, and that is stuff you can see in our Sabbath series, which has example rituals and stuff like that. So I'll make sure to put something that links you to that here in the course. And you could always tune in for some of our rituals. We usually do ritual together for Sabbaths on our YouTube channel, and we will for Samhain coming up. Okay, so another example on the spring equinox, some wording, we kindle this fire today in the presence of the holy ones, without malice, without jealousy, without envy, without fear of aught beneath the sun. But the high gods, thee we invoke, O light of life, be thou a bright flame before us, be thou a guiding star above us, be thou a smooth path beneath us. Kindle thou within our hearts a flame of love for our neighbors, to our foes, to our friends, to our kindred all, to all men on the broad earth, O merciful Son of Caradwen, from the lowliest thing that liveth to the name which is highest of all. So you can hear there, to the name, capital N, which is highest of all. The name, Hashem, is what they call God, the all-conscious being in Judaism. So you can see the Kabbalistic influence, the Jewish influence in this, even if it isn't completely authentic. It is obviously very present in Alexandrianism, and it's just more hermetic and more about that than the Gardnerian traditions. Now, I'm really hoping that YouTube does not censor this, or I'll have to cut it. But here are some pictures from this book. This is an original print that I found in a bookshop, and I got really lucky to find it. I'm not sure if you can find a copy of this or not, but this is Alexander's and his High Priestess and wife, Maxine, and you can see their altar. See the chalice in the middle and the candles up there? And this is what it looked like when we talk about doing ritual skyclad, doing initiation skyclad, and binding people to the altar. You can see up here, you can see she's bound to the altar. You can see everyone is naked. You can see them using the sword, see him using the sword to call the quarters. So that is what you should think of when you're thinking of British traditional Wicca, especially the ones that are more in line with the original traditions, and they've kept those traditions alive. Most of the covens use robes today. Doing group ritual skyclad is much less common today than it was back in this day when they had more secrecy and more privacy, but there are still covens who do that kind of thing today. So it is worth it to know why they do it and who does it. Moving on to another slide here on British traditional Wicca, we have the two that are a little bit more modern, or they came later on than the Gardnerian Alexandrianism. Seax Wicca comes from Buckland, so we're going to read some of Buckland's Big Blue Book. And Algard Wicca was very heavily guarded and protected and kept secret. It is a combination between Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca, which were eventually remerged together. You do still find Gardnerian, Alexandrian separately. You do find some covens that say they are Gardnerian/Alexandrian influenced. They are not offshoots, they're derivatives. They were inspired by that way of doing things, but they are not lineage affiliated. That happened to me. I initiated with High Priestess, who was in a tradition that is a blend of Gardnerian, Alexandrian, but that was led by a person who never initiated into a Gardnerian or Alexandrian coven. So I go to join a Gardnerian coven and say, oh, I think I am Gardnerian. And they're like, no, if you were, you would definitely know. You know what I mean? Like, that's not, you weren't. I was like, oh, well, that's just what they told me. So I didn't know, but now I do. And Algard is Hermetic. It's a good blend. They use different deities, not just Cernunnos, not just Carnena, but Cern as well, Pan, some pronounce it Kern, Pan, Aridia, Diana, and Fauna. So they have different, more varied deities because they're trying to be more encompassing. There's less Kabbalah, less eloquent speech. It's more modern. And less is known about the tradition. There's no publications from its members. It was kept very secret. Still is today, I believe. I think it still exists today. But they did very likely do skyclad initiations. You had to initiate to be a member. This is the one from the documentary where they blindfolded the person and had them find the ritual space blindfolded. There's a good documentary in our documentary series, playlist that I have. There's a good documentary that goes over Wicca, and they show an example of a coven where the member had to be blindfolded and bare and find his way to the ritual space for initiation. And that is Algard Wicca. Chalices and cauldrons on the altar, daggers and swords are used in ritual. It's a real blending of the two traditions. They do less binding to the altar, less time is spent on that. They don't bind people in specific ways necessarily. And they do a lot of cord work, though. So they still use cords, but just not to bind people to the altar as much. In Seax Wicca, that's again less hermetic and more modern. They use the Lord and Lady as a generic, nameless god and goddess, though there are many names for the Lord and Lady that they do often use throughout the rituals. Think Isis, Astarte, Diana, Hecate, Demeter, Kali, Inanna. That chant is something that very well may have come from Seax Wicca or come from American witchcraft. American British traditional witchcraft, which is a little silly. They'd usually shorten it to BTW, so they'd say it's American BTW, which is a little silly, but that's okay. Classic symbols are used again. I have a picture of Buckland to show you. He wore a pentagram. More informal phrasing, they knelt when they called upon divinity at every time, not just initiates kneeling, but everyone kneels when they call in divinity. Candles, cords, elevated candles, lots of representations of divinity, including busts and statues. Modern Gardnerians do also use busts and statues, but in the beginning it was less common. It wasn't available as much. So now it is more common, even in Gardnerian covens. They often have a statue or a bust to represent the god and goddess on their altar, but sometimes it'll just be a large candle and maybe various other things around the candle, and it's all decorated and set up nice, but maybe not an actual like physical representation. Handmade tools that you make yourself are a requirement in Seax, but in Gardnerian Alexandrian Wicca, you're supposed to be gifted your tools by your leader. And some people will say that you can't make your own tools. How can you consecrate a tool if you don't have a tool to consecrate it with? So you have to initiate as a witch in order to get consecrated tools from a witch. And that's what they say. We talked about that and debunked all of that last time, but that's what they say. In Seax, you have to make them yourself, even the daggers, even the robes. He gives all the instructions on how to do it in the Big Blue Book, which we're going to flip through in a second. And they also would often refer to circle as temple. He also detailed how you cut a doorway in the circle to let people in. I don't see that printed in many other places. So I'm not sure if that started with him or if the Gardnerian Alexandrians also did it and just didn't talk much about it. I'm not sure. But the initiates were bound and you did have to initiate, but they were not bent over. They were not usually bare. They usually wore robes or were gifted robes. Okay, let's read some of Buckland's Big Blue Book. And this book has absolutely everything. It is a workbook. It is something that you're supposed to use as a workbook and learn witchcraft from. I want to show one of the examples of the Seax altar. So you can see this, the Seax altar that has the god and goddess representation. It has a secondary god and goddess representation, but only one candle in the center. So that is more common in Seax. In Gardnerian Alexandrian, you usually see candles for both, one for the god, one for the goddess, and you may see a single representation of the god and goddess. Often it'll be like an amulet, or often it'll just be a big candle that's decorated or colored a certain way. But in Seax, you see the actual representations of it. Another thing that's common in Seax Wicca are crystal wands. This is an image of Buckland. So he is the guy that most people credit with bringing witchcraft to America. So that's cool, or Wicca, I mean. And he has a crystal wand and a pentagram around his neck. And this page is all about how you make your own robes and how you make your own tools. It's a whole section. It's early on in his book. So clearly Buckland does think that making tools and having tools is very important. You can see the method of binding for an initiation. So they showed this is how you actually bind someone. Notice that this person is upright. They are not bent over. They are not bound quite as much as before, but they are still blindfolded. So that is another difference. And he has some example phrases of how to call down the circle, or how to set up the temple is what he calls it, erect the temple. The priestess might say, "Be it known that temple is about to be erected. The circle is about to be cast. Let those who desire attendance gather in the east and await the summons. Let none be here but of their own free will." So in Seax Wicca, they cast the circle with nobody inside, and then they bring everyone in through a doorway. That's another difference. Most Gardnerian covens will bring everyone in first. They'll attune and do stuff on the way in, get their bodies ready to be in sacred space, but then they'll cast the circle together from within sacred space. So that's another difference. And then the priestess will say, "Here do I bring light and air in at the east to illuminate our temple and bring it to the breath of life." So notice it's more modern phrasing. It's more concise. It's less poetic. It's much less dramatic than Gardner or Alexander's ever was. "Here do I bring light and fire in at the south to illuminate our temple and bring it north. Here do I bring light and water at the west to illuminate our temple and wash it clean." So these are quarter callings, right? But they're very basic. They're not like, "I stand at the watchtower to the west and call upon the sacred guardians of water," or whatever. They're not like big, elaborate, flowy things. So that's more kind of Seax. I have another marking in the book. What did I want to read? Yes. Okay, so on this page, I wanted to read a little bit. They have a new or dark moon ritual. So in Seax Wicca, they did ritual at the dark moon as well. They celebrated every phase of the moon. So at the full moon, they say things like, "Lovely lady, you who have been known by so many names to so many people, Aphrodite, Caridwen, Diana, Ea, Freya, Gana, Isis, and many more have been your names. Yet do we know you and love you as," whatever the coven name for the goddess is. Usually they would decide upon that, but sometimes they would say the name of the priestess who's bringing the energy down into herself. "And in that name, we do adore you and worship you. With your Lord by your side, do we give you due honor and invite you to join with us on this your special night." Okay? Then the priestess, when she has the energy inside of her, would say, "I am she who watches over thee, mother of you all. Know that I rejoice that you do not forget me. To pay me homage at the full of the moon is meet and right and brings joy unto yourselves, even as it does to me. Know that with my good Lord, I weave the skin of life for each and every one of you. I am at the beginning of life and at its end, the maiden, the mother, and the crone," which is the first time in print, I believe we see that exact phrasing. "Wherever you may be, if you seek me, know that I am always here, for I abide deep within you. Look then within yourself if you would seek me. I am life, I am love. Find me and rejoice, for love is my music and laughter is my song. Be true to me, and I will be ever true to you. Love is the law, and love is the bond. So mote it be. So that is a different version of the charge of the goddess. Notice it's pretty much the same idea. Again, leaves off the Christian hate that was in Aridia, but focuses on the gather once in a month when the moon is full and worship me and give me your allegiance, and I will bless you and honor you. They also have one for the dark moon. Endings and beginnings, ebbing and flowing is a common chant, seen for the first time in print in this book, I believe, probably from Seax Wicca. And the priestess instead this time says, hear me, honor me, and love me now and always, right? So even when she's dark, you are meant to love her. As the wheel turns, we see birth, death, and rebirth. Know from this that every end is a beginning. Every step a fresh starting point. Maiden, mother, crone, I am all of these and more. Whenever you have need of anything, call upon me. I and my Lord are here, for I abide within you all. Even at the darkest times when there seems no single spark to warm you and the night seems blackest of all, I am here, watching and waiting to grow with you in strength and in love. I am she who is at the beginning and the end of all time, so mote it be. So that's another version of the charge of the goddess, this time meant to be read at the dark moon. So it has that theme of, it's not really a dark moon. The moon is not gone, right? It's a cycle. So we'll pull from the ending or the beginning of the cycle, and it starts again every month. So that is a celebration of cycles and this sort of thing that you just don't see in other sects of Wicca. So I wanted to read some of that, and that is Seax Wicca and Buckland's Big Blue Book. And then, like I said, I don't have any excerpts from Algard Wicca to give you. I'm not sure that any exist. If anyone is an Algard Wiccan witch and does feel comfortable sharing some of the differences that make that tradition more original than just Gardnerian or Alexandrian in its original and their original forms, feel free to put that in our comments. We would love that, and we would love to hear from you. But I don't have anything to point to, so I don't want to, misrepresent it either. So that's what I know. That's British traditional Wicca. Those are the four that are really the keystones of British traditional Wicca. I'm sure there are other smaller groups that have hived off of those or done their own traditions that were originally Gardnerian or Alexandrian witches. There are many of them in the world, but those are the ones that are the largest. And if you go to a Gardnerian coven, you'll find them doing similar rituals to what you see in here even today. Now, I don't have a lot of examples to point to for these ones as well. These are derivations of British traditional Wicca. So they feel British traditional in essence, but they're also a little bit more eclectic, a little bit more unique. One of them is called Blue Star Wicca. It's an eclectic coven that's very British traditional in feel and vibe. They focus a lot on community service, and they have a lot more musical liturgy. So if you notice from the Gardnerian Alexandrian, from Seax and others, they're not very musical. They do some chanting. They do have a lot of chants that hail from that time period, but a lot of it is just more about like vibrating the sounds and not like singing or actually producing music. Vibration is when, you go like, oh. So it's more than just singing a pitch. You're actually taking the sound and putting it out into the world so that everyone can feel it and not just hear it. So you'll see a lot of vibration in the British traditional Wiccan sects, but you're not going to see as much actual music because they're very hermetic. They're very influenced by hermetic culture, which is big on vibrating and not big on singing. In Blue Star Wicca is when you start to see people will sing. It was founded in Philadelphia in 1975. You must be initiated into an existing coven, but then you can be a solitary witch. You can do ritual by yourself. In the British traditional Wiccan covens, they do not believe that you can do Wiccan witchcraft alone. They think you need a man and a woman to do the great rite. And if you don't have both, you can't do it. So that is like the divide, okay? That is what makes it British traditional Wicca. Because most covens today say you can do the great rite on your own, or two women can hold the tools, or two men, and that it's less particular because it's a representation. Some of these initial covens may very well have been doing ritual sex. They may have had the high priest and high priestess perform the actual great rite in the middle of the coven while everyone else chants or drums or does something to support it. In Buckland's Big Blue Book, he talks about how to do a ritual where only couples are present and all of them are doing it together simultaneously at the same time. It is not the same thing as an orgy because you're with a single partner and you're just one-on-one with your partner. And it's seen as an act of, divinity. When the two sides, male and female, come together, it's transcendent. So it was for religious purposes. It was not about pleasure. And as far as anything beyond that, you're guessing, unless you're going to one of these, unless you're doing these rituals and you have some knowledge that you can put in my comments, that is great. But I have never participated in that capacity myself. I'm a very modest person generally, so for me, it's symbolic. The Great Rite, I have done the Great Rite with my husband, but in privacy, in our own private lives. So our anniversary is May 1st. My husband and I, our High Priest, Ogunslav, we're very traditional witches in our own way, even if neither one of us ever initiated into a traditional coven. I did study with a bunch of traditional covens, so many different courses for years. And I just never really felt like at home there because I'm too eclectic. I want to be able to do my own thing. I'm very individual. And I'm also very modest, and they were just way less modest than me. And it wasn't a good fit. And then I wasn't a good fit for the eclectic covens because they're often not academic enough, or, I would be like, oh, well, your astrological signs are wrong because of planetary precession. Well, they didn't like that. So I never really fit into covens, and that's why I'm here running a group for solitaries and teaching all of you. But yeah, so the derivatives of BTW, the derivatives, are less formal in how they do things, and that's why that's when they evolved, that's when you start to see the Great Rite shift from an actual physical thing that you do to a symbolic act that involves tools. That's when you see the shift away from binding people to the altar. You see more people start to wear robes in ritual instead of being truly sky-clad. And you see that in all of these different ones. So in Celtic Wicca, it's the same, but they have a higher emphasis on the power of the elements, on making use of fae, and plants and minerals and animals and nature worship, and many of them are vegetarian. That was founded by Lady Gwen Thompson in the UK, and it is an open tradition. Anyone can identify as Celtic Wiccan. They do not have to initiate into an existing coven. Dianic Wicca is the one that is purely for women, so some people do not consider it Wiccan. It hived off of the fairy tradition, just like Starhawk's reclaiming tradition, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it's a little more private, and there's less publications surrounding it. And you do have to initiate into the coven, and you have to be a woman. And it was inspired by the Gospel of Aridia, and it's big on Christian hate a little bit from time to time, but I've never actually heard any of the phrasings in any of the rituals, so it's likely they dropped the Christian hate from the Charge of the Goddess as well, but I don't know for sure. Again, if you're part of these traditions and you're watching my videos, I would love to hear from you. It was founded by Susanna Budapest in the US in the 70s. But that's the extent of what I know about it. Georgian Wicca, again, it's a lot like Algard Wicca. It's like a British traditional Wiccan derivative because it was founded by George Patterson, who himself was not a member of a Gardnerian or Alexandrian coven. He was initiated by someone who was initiated by someone, you know what I'm saying, who ran a tradition that was Gardnerian, Alexandrian in essence, but it wasn't like, it doesn't directly trace its lineage all the way back to a Gardnerian person. And in this tradition, initiation is necessary, but there's solitary practice as well. And it was founded in California in the 70s. So it's a little bit more eclectic than Algard Wicca, and that's the extent of what I know about it. It's, again, though, think probably very similar to traditions of the past, but made more modern, right? So these are much more modern traditions. Then we have the actual eclectic traditions, Lothlorien Wicca. That is a very eclectic tradition. It's highly nature-based, so it's similar to Celtic, but it has less of a theme surrounding the cauldron on the altar. It has more themes that involve the cycles of life, phases of the moon, representations of the passage of time. It's very open. It boasts having very few prejudices. It's very inclusive. They permit solitary work. They permit self-initiation. So that is a tradition that anyone could join at any time. It was founded in Washington in 1981 by Bayerl. Reclaiming Wicca. This one is the eclectic tradition founded by Starhawk, who is a huge influence, not just on Wicca, but also a massive proponent of LGBTQ plus rights. And she is the one who really helped Wicca become something that is acceptable in the eyes of the law, helped homosexuality become accepted and legalized. And she's known for her inclusivity and activism. Based on the fairy tradition, which no one knows much about because they're very private. Again, if you're a fairy practitioner, I'm not even sure that that's technically Wicca. I'd love to hear from you. Very big into goddess worship. She does not exclude male membership, but they do almost exclusively work with the goddess. Teaching is done in camps and one-on-one, and they initiate people in that way. Most people who are reclaiming Wicca have initiated with someone who was reclaiming Wicca. I'm not sure if you have to initiate into an existing coven to be considered reclaiming. I'm not sure, but most people are who call themselves that. And it was founded in San Francisco in 1980 by Starhawk. Aridian or Aridian Wiccan is what it's called today, is a tradition that's based around Stregheria, which is Italian witchcraft. And it was passed down to Raven Grimassi through his ancestry. So he's a lineage witch who came into the scene a little bit later than the rest of them, did not initiate into an existing coven. So his tradition is very much different than the British traditional Wicca. It's very Gallic and a lot less Gaelic. It does not involve Kabbalah or Hermeticism of any kind. There is initiation. There is an initiation ritual that exists for them, but solitary practice is allowed, and they view it like you don't have to initiate to call yourself that, to be an Italian witch. It's founded by Raven Grimassi in the 80s, and there are many, many, many more in this category. I'm going to do some reading of excerpts from a few books left here so that you can understand some of these more eclectic traditions and how they differ from the British traditional Wiccan varieties. Note before I do that, so I don't forget, that eclectic Wicca is its own category that's separate from these. Okay, so these are eclectic traditions. Eclectic Wicca is not a tradition. It's not a lineage. It's not a tradition. It's just a category for all the other kinds of Wicca that exist. And you would probably put open-minded Wicca in the eclectic category, although we are not just for Wiccans. So I'll talk about us in a second. There's no unifying traditions to eclectic Wicca. The covens may be completely different, work with different deities, have different ritual styles, use different phrasing, believe in different things, have different values, come together at different times of the month or for different reasons. But they do sometimes form groups, larger organizations. Like, for instance, the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel has 13 covens in and around the Philadelphia area, and they are all eclectic covens, and most of them are totally wonderful, huge members of the community, often leading public rituals. They often include new members in their private rituals. They're less secretive, and they're just wonderful. And they're a great resource if you're getting started, and you're like, how do I get started with Wicca if I don't know if I want to be traditional, if I don't know if I want to join a coven? Well, start with the eclectics, because they don't care. They're like, yeah, be Wiccan, find yourself. And then you can decide, okay, this is not, enough of a rigorous religious life for me. I want to do something that's maybe a little more committed or a little more standard. Then you would go to the more traditional groups, probably. Okay, so let's do some reading. So this is Bruce K. Wilburn's Witchcraft. All of these books I'm reading are further reading books, or they're cited in my book. So if you go to the back of the book and look under citations, you will find how to get all of these books. I recommend you own a copy of many of these if you want to be a Wiccan leader, if you want to have your own coven. Then I recommend you read most of them and have your own bookshelf full of them that you can give to people or reference to people or use as a reference when writing rituals. Because that is how you be authentic, and authenticity is powerful. So here's an example of Italian witchcraft. Some of the phrasings they may use to conjure the circle. Diana, goddess of the moon. Dianus, god of the sun. We gather today and call your holy name. So that's stating a ritual purpose. And then they may say, I conjure you, spirits of the earth. Grace us with your presence within this sacred circle and grant us unity with your powers. Notice modern, not too highly ordered, more eclectic, more prose-like speech. And it's just less formal and less heavy. It doesn't involve calling the guardians or any of that sort of thing. They may say, I conjure this circle to become a vessel, to contain the power which shall be raised within, and which shall serve to protect the rights held within its confines, as we honor the old gods, Diana and Dianus. So that's an example of calling the quarter. There's another kind of Wicca, Saxon Wicca, all the Germanic kinds of Wicca that exist. It's a little bit different. Some of them refer to the temple, and it kind of is a little bit like Seax Wicca, which, you know, Seax comes from Saxon, so it's likely that it has its foundings in the writings of Buckland, although it's very eclectic. It's not necessarily the same thing as Seax Wicca. But some of the phrasing involves erecting the temple, so that's how you can tell that it has a similar source. The temple is about to be erected. Let all within this temple be here of their own free will and accord in peace, love, and harmony. And you can see the importance of free love and peace and love in Buckland's, because the free love movement was huge, and it was on the wings of that movement that Buckland's tradition came to America. And then they might say, I bring light and air into the circle at the east to illuminate the temple and give it a breath of life, right? So that is exactly similar phrasing to what we see in Seax Wicca, and that's what you might expect from Saxon Wicca. But the difference is now, so when they say what deities they're going to call forth, they're using Germanic deity names. In Seax Wicca, usually it's a nameless lord and lady, or many, many names for the lord and lady at once. In Saxon Wicca, they will say, let us now invite Woden and Frigg to our circle to witness these rites that we are about to hold in their honor, right? So they'll actually call the deities by Germanic names. Another example in Italian Wicca, this is Italian, okay? This is the Aridian or other traditions like it. Hear me, Diana and Dianus, as we honor and praise you for attending our circle. We now bid you depart for your secret realms, that you may come again when we call. With peace and love we say, Ave Vale, right? So they're actually going to be speaking Italian at times as well, and that's Italian Wicca. And then in Saxon Wicca, it's very similar, this one, to, so I won't repeat it. But here you can see in Italian Wicca how they may call upon the goddess of the moon. They still have a goddess pose, and she would say, Diana, goddess of the moon, queen of the heavens, hear me at this time of need. I call upon you to enter this circle. Appear before me, lovely Diana. And she reaches up and gets into the goddess pose, and then she says, Diana, goddess of beauty and love, as your priestess welcomes you with upraised arms, I invoke you to descend upon us and lend your power to this rite. Okay, so that is another example of Italian phrasing and how they call upon the goddess. Now, Saxon Wicca does not have a charge of the goddess specifically. They have sort of like a conversation between the god and goddess, like a back and forth. And the goddess may say something like, when man was a child, the gods watched over him. The goddess Frigg was his mother, the great god Woden his father. From the god and goddess, man learned all. He was taught that he would be rewarded when he did right, but would receive nothing when he did wrong. He learned that when he gave of himself, his love, his life, it would be returned to him. Yet when greed or malice drove him on, he would suffer for his actions. For the gods are just and fair. Please them and be rewarded. Yet, as we need them, they need us. Our love is theirs and theirs is ours. Let us therefore live and love together, always knowing that love is the law and love is the bond. So you can see again the emphasis on love and peace and harmony that comes from Seax, but they're also working with Germanic deities. And then the high priest might speak his own. During this time when the moon is full and the great mother is at her most glorious, bless us with your love. Hear us and answer our call as we honor you, lovely Lady Frigg. At different times and different places, you have been known by many names to many people. Aphrodite, Aaron-Rod, Caradwen, Diana, Isis. Through these names and many more, you have been adored. Yet it is as Frigg that we know you, and it is by this name that we worship you. And then this is like their version of the charge, which is a little bit different, but it still is the high priestess channeling the goddess and saying, hear me, honor me, and love me, now and for all time. For I am the beginning of life, and I am its end. Notice again the similar phrasing to Seax Wicca. I am the one who watches over you. I am the maiden, the mother, the crone. I am all of this and much more. In strength and love, I am the one who you seek. Yet whenever you have need of me, look no farther than yourself, and know that I am always here, for I abide within you. And as you would be true to yourself, so shall you be true to me. Do this, and I shall be your strength, love, and desire, your guide and guardian, your beginning and your end. And then the god has a way to respond as well. And he also would channel the god, and it's not just a charge of the goddess, it's also a charge of the god, and it's both of them combined. In Italian Wicca, so in the Aridian Wiccan tradition and ones like it, you're going to see phrasing like this. I conjure thee, O Lord, as thou canst never have rest or peace until thou shalt be freed from the sun where thou art prisoned, and must go, beating thy hands and running fast. Meanwhile, I pray thee, let me know my destiny. And if 'tis evil, change its course for me. If thou wilt grant this grace, I'll see it clear, in the water, in the splendor of the sun. And thou, O Lord, shalt tell by word of mouth whatever this my destiny is to be. And unless thou grantest this, mayst thou never know peace or bliss. So it's a charge of the god, which doesn't exist in most Wiccan traditions. And it's very kind of old world speech. It kind of reminds me of like Romeo and Juliet or that sort of thing. It's rhyming, it's got couplets, so that's very Italian, that's very romantic. And that is the kind of thing you would see in Italian Wicca. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's do some reclaiming Wicca. So this is The Spiral Dance by Starhawk. And I wanted to read some excerpts from this. First of all, I think it's cool to read her statement on inclusivity, and also there's a quote here as well. All living beings, it says, my law is love unto all beings, which is in their charge of the goddess. And she says down here at the bottom of the page, all living beings are worthy of respect. All are supported by the sacred elements of air, fire, water, and earth. We work to create and sustain communities and cultures that embody our values, that can help to heal the wounds of the earth and her peoples, and that can sustain us and nurture future generations. Okay, so that is an exact quote, coming from Starhawk. And I just think that it's like the essence of reclaiming Wicca is inclusivity, right? It's right there at the very start of this book. And I just think it's great to take a moment and appreciate that. I also think it's interesting that Starhawk was born Jewish. And she says here on page 14 in her introduction, the concept of a religion that worshipped a goddess was amazing and empowering. Raised Jewish, I had been very religious as a child and had pursued my Jewish education to an advanced level. But as I reached young womanhood in the late 60s, something seemed lacking. The feminist movement had not yet entered its period of resurgence, and I had never heard the word patriarchy, but I sensed that the tradition as it stood then was somehow lacking in models for me as a woman and in avenues for the development of female spiritual power. And I think that's interesting because I also was Orthodox Jewish for a few years, and I was born Jewish, but I wasn't raised religious. But in college, I wanted to explore my ancestry, so I went hard into Judaism and practiced Chabad Judaism. And I left ultimately because I can't be a Jewish woman. You're not allowed to sing. You guys have been to my rituals. I can't stop singing. It's considered rude because men are not allowed to listen to you sing. You're not allowed to have long hair. You have to cover your hair when you get married. I couldn't handle that. I couldn't be a Jewish woman because it's too sexist. Like, if the men are the ones who have trouble with their sexuality, why do I have to cover myself up? It seems like a punishment. But then they're like, well, no, that's just the polite thing to do. And I'm like, you know something? Maybe women are tired of being polite because men suck at life. Just a fact, right? Just a thought. Maybe men should be better than that, right? Like, come on. What? For millennia, you're going to tell me that it's women's fault that men can't control themselves? I could not take it. I tried very, very hard, even after I started to feel bad about being a woman. I dressed very modestly. I dressed tznius, and I liked the modesty aspect, but that was the time in my life when I was the most harassed. when I dressed modestly. And I just decided I couldn't do that anymore when on Yom Kippur, everyone had been fasting, including me. You know, it's a 28-hour fast or something like that. And we were setting the table for everyone after Rabbi had been on his feet for like 14 straight hours doing prayers and leading prayers up in shul. And we were trying to set the table for everyone to eat. And they just wouldn't, they wouldn't set a place for Rabbi. So selfish, just like so hasty and rude. And I get that they hadn't eaten, but I wasn't like that, even though I hadn't eaten. And I didn't understand why they couldn't control themselves. And they live on a tenet of, well, we can't control ourselves, and that's why we need the law, Talmud. That's why we need Jewish law. And I was like, yes, but you could also practice self-control, right? Like you could just be better than that. So I couldn't take it. They're very selfish. And I couldn't be a Jewish woman because I couldn't stop singing in public places. I couldn't stop being, embarrassingly beautiful. I couldn't stop being a beautiful, successful, empowered woman long enough to be a Jewish one. And that's why I left. And I think that's very interesting that it's also the case for Starhawk, and that there are other women in Wicca who left to be Wiccan because they couldn't be women in traditional religious spaces. I just think that's neat. Anyway, neat aside. So I wanted to read some of the phrasing from her tradition, however. So here's how you create sacred space in reclaiming Wicca. This is the more classic traditional phrasing that we think of today. It's modern, but it's also poetic and emphatic, right? Hail, guardians of the watchtowers of the east, powers of air, we invoke you and call you. Golden eagle of the dawn, star seeker, whirlwind, rising sun, come by the air that is her breath. That's a common chant, by the way, in Wicca. By the air that is her body, by the earth that is her body, by the air that is her breath, by the fire that is her bright spirit, by the living water of her womb. And now no Jewish man can watch this lecture series, by the way. So that is why I can't be a Jewish woman. Okay, but so there you go. So that's how you call the watchtowers, right? Hail, guardians of the watchtowers of the south, powers of fire. We invoke you and call you, red lion of the noon heat, flaming one, summer's warmth, spark of life. Come by the fire that is her spirit. Send forth your flame. Be here now. So it's traditional phrasing, but modernized. And it's very poetic and metaphorical and evocative. That's reclaiming Wicca. Here's an example of an invocation to the god. Seed sower, grain reborn, horned one come. Io evohe. Bright sun, dark death, lord of winds, lord of dance. Sun child, winter-born king, hanged one, untamed, stag and stallion, goat and bull, sailor of the last sea, guardian of the gate, lord of the two lands, ever dying, ever living, radiance, Dionysus, Osiris, Pan, Demutzi, Arthur, Robin, Yennecote, Ho, move us, touch us, shake us, bring us through. And then after a time, he would say, he is here, and everyone would say, blessed be. They did a lot of chanting, especially when it comes to the goddess. So that was, I shared that for the god. Most of the book is about the goddess. But one such chant is, our bodies are sacred, our breasts are sacred, our wombs are sacred, our hands are sacred. It builds and builds until they finally say, our voices are sacred, our voices carry power, the power to create, the power to change the world. Let go, let them become sound. Chant without words, let them be heard. So it's not just a celebration of the female body and the female body's ability to create life. In British traditional Wicca, the women are there largely as wombs. And they're not given much power, and they're not allowed to lead the ritual. They really are just there because their body is sacred. In reclaiming Wicca, Starhawk said, heck no. We want women to speak. We want women to sing. We want women to be heard, not just seen, not just celebrated as someone who can carry life in her body. And that is the modern Wiccan take, that is where the divide happened. In British traditional Wicca, it's very sexist, but even modern British traditional Wiccan covens were influenced by Starhawk and became more feminist in time. And that is something to keep in mind, that Starhawk had a huge influence on the course of Wicca by just being a woman with a loud voice, and a voice that was well worth listening to. So another page I have marked is the fivefold blessing from Reclaiming Wicca. It's a lot less traditional. So, blessed are your feet that have brought you in these ways. Blessed are your knees that kneel at the sacred altar. Blessed is your sex, without which we would not be. Notice the lack of reference to genitalia. Because in Reclaiming Wicca, it doesn't matter if you're transgender. It doesn't matter what physical parts you have. It doesn't matter if you've transitioned. What matters is that your body is sacred and a celebration of divinity. So that is a defining difference in Reclaiming Wicca as well, which is a large, large source of support for the transgender movement back in the day. Blessed are your breasts, formed in strength and beauty. That is classic Gardnerian phrasing. Blessed are your lips, which shall speak the sacred names. Again, classic phrasing. So Starhawk is a woman who learned and learned. She was an exceptionally intelligent woman who was authentic in everything she did. She got as far as she could in Judaism and could not be a Jewish woman. I can relate. She tried to join British traditional Wicca and she could not be a Wiccan woman. So what did she do? Did she say, I guess there's no religion for women, shrug? No, she made Wicca for women. She made it. She inspired Dianic Wicca. She led the LGBTQ plus rights movements, largely from California, which is one of the reasons why it's so progressive a state today. Whether you celebrate that progressiveness or not, in its modern form, you have to admit that Starhawk was exceptionally influential, not just in Wicca, but in Wicca especially, but also in general in the course of the world, in the course of American progressivism. So huge, huge book, really well worth the read, especially if you are non-conforming. This one's worth it. Okay, so these are the traditional forms of Wicca. We have our own tradition called the Open Minded Wiccan tradition. In our tradition, however, we are not, we're an open tradition. Anyone can call themselves open-minded at any time. If you're watching this, whether you want to join our Crossroads server or not, we have a Discord server for, largely we're solitary. We don't train people in a specific way of doing things. I and our leadership team are empowered to help any person from any spiritual path. We are not just for Wiccans. We have some members who are Satanist. We have had members who are Catholic. We have some Orthodox Christian members, some Jewish members. I think we had a couple that came in for a while who were Islamic. We have conversations on every subject. We have some Hindu members. We are for every tradition, every lineage. We don't have any leaders yet who are not Wiccan or Satanists. We have two new Satanists. We have actually one is a First Nation, and he considers himself shamanic, though he started with Satanism, and now he's a shaman, and he'll become a leader soon. And then we have another rising leader who is what most would call satanic, but he is calling his tradition something new, and we're not sure what yet, but he's starting a new tradition. And then we have quite a few who are Wiccan leaders, and most of our membership is Wiccan or witches. But again, we exist as a universalist tradition because people like me could not decide if they wanted to be Jewish or Christian or Wiccan, so I am very Jewish in my beliefs. I talk to God. I type God with a dash, so you have to get over that. I know the Jewish Kabbalah very well. I know Jewish law very well. I used to keep it for a while. I don't anymore. But I go to church every Sunday. I go to a Methodist church. I really just love God. I love learning about God and worshiping God. I don't really care what the environment is. I will find meaning and purpose and spirituality in absolutely any environment. My practices are Wiccan. I was raised as a witch. So my traditions and my celebration of the changing seasons, and my use of herbs and incense and harvesting materials and collecting rocks and things like this. I'm definitely a witch. That is probably my strongest association. But I'm also a Christian. I'm also Jewish. So what am I? I am open-minded. And that is the foundation of our tradition. We exist so you can just replace the denomination. Are you Methodist? No, you're open-minded. Are you Chabad Jewish? No, you're open-minded Jewish. Are you Gardnerian witch? No, you're open-minded Wiccan, right? So we just put the OM in front of whatever path we choose. And we believe that every path is valid and any path can lead you to divinity and to enlightenment and to living your best life in your own unique way. So that's our tradition, the open-minded path. And in open-minded Wicca, we have our own Charge of the Goddess, which we've read in the past. It's in my book. We do have a certification process for members. We don't want to endorse people as leaders if we're not sure that they will be professional, academic. Like I've seen enough horror stories from other traditions, and they don't really know how to kick the person out because the person initiated is a Gardnerian witch. So what do you do if they start to require their members have sex with them or something crazy, right? Like, what do you do then? Well, we had that trouble at first too. We had a leader who I trained to be a leader, form her own coven and hive, and then start making all of her members provide artwork to her so that she could sell it, so that she could make money for her members. We have a rule against monetization. I would not prohibit donations, but our coven doesn't accept them. Our organization is not monetized. I turned on monetization for our channel so that I could turn off the ads. We do not believe in monetization of spirituality and spiritual learning because money can corrupt. So she started to do that, and I said, that's not acceptable. So we needed some kind of certification process that would ensure that any leader in our organization that we endorse as an open-minded leader is on the up and up and is not doing that kind of shady stuff. They have a lot of ethics, and that's why we have assessments. We have an acolyte assessment, which is more, it's not pass-fail. It's more like a worksheet for you to be like, okay, do I have the knowledge and the skills of an acolyte? Well, this assessment will tell me if I do or not. And only the first section is right or wrong answers. Many of them are about our lineage and our creed, but the second half is all just a worksheet. So even if you plan on being solitary, feel free to call yourself Open-Minded Wiccan. Feel free to use those assessments on openmindedpath.org to see if you're ready to call yourself an acolyte if it's hard for you to know. Or if you're not sure what an acolyte would normally know because you've been solitary your whole life. Well, I went ahead and studied with 4 different covens, 3 of them British traditional, so that I could know what do acolytes know in Wicca. I've read every book on the shelf. Trust me, I have exhaustively researched it, and if you can do all the things in that assessment, you're an acolyte. And it's also designed to be usable by other paths. So even if you want to be Christo-pagan or flat out Christian, and then we would accept leaders from other paths as well. So I foresee one day we may have open-minded pastors or open-minded rabbis, people who are not Wiccan, but who believe in universalism and that we should all just get along. Like we've had members who were pastors who didn't certify as leaders, but they just wanted to understand tarot. They wanted to understand witchcraft. They're like, I don't feel like what they're doing is evil. So I thought I should try to understand it. And I was like, that's great. Welcome. So you'll see in our server that we have channels to talk about every major world religion, and we have discussions on all kinds of topics. And we just don't really care that much about hating each other. So that's Open-Minded Wicca. And we're also primarily a community for solitary practitioners. Again, the only thing that unifies us is a standard of ethics, academics, professionalism, authenticity. We care about being authentic. And a lot of people will want to work with deities that are not in their heritage culture. And then they're told, you're not allowed to do that. You can't be Santeria if you're not Latino. And in our tradition, we're just like, no, do what works for you, but be authentic, right? Learn Spanish, read the books in their languages, go there and learn from people, ask good questions. Don't just say you are something that you don't really understand, right? Be authentic. Authenticity matters. And again, we're not for profit. So at no point in time are we appropriating, because we're not using that information to profit off of it. We're using it to better ourselves and be more in line with our true selves. So we do think cultural appropriation happens. That's when you profit off of borrowing from another culture. Like you make earrings that resemble native earrings, and then people buy those instead of spending their money at native shops, right? That's not good, right? So we don't do that kind of thing in our organization, but we do allow people to borrow inspiration from outside of their heritage. So that's another thing that people run into a lot online and get a lot of crap over. So if you're having trouble finding a community because you're not conforming, please feel free to join our Crossroads. You can find the link at the top of openmindedpath.org. Okay, that's us. Now that's a lot. I know that these last two lectures are a little bit long. Covering the postmodern topics is difficult. Now we're going to shift track and talk about the divine persona. This is not something that most people have developed very well by the time they're an acolyte. So the reason it's kind of slammed in here, smushed in at the end of this series, is that you don't need to know it to initiate. None of the information after the end of chapter 7 is necessary to initiate. It's more just like background, history, context, philosophy, right? Modern topics. And this is in the same vein as that. So if you are initiating as an acolyte, what will you be doing next? You'll be seeking your divine persona, seeking the part of you that is a bridge to your transcendent soul, right? The soul is timeless. It's formless. It doesn't make sense. It's hard to make sense of it in daily life where things are bound by time and bound by form. So you have to use metaphors. And that's why the divine persona exists. It is not a function of the ego. Your name, your spiritual name, mine is Tehillah. That was given to me by my Rebbe Tzen, and I bought mitzvah as Tehillah in Jerusalem in 2013. And I love that name because Tehillah means psalm. It means song for God. And my inner animal is the phoenix. It's not common for someone's inner animal to be a transcendent mythological creature. It's usually a real animal. I have a very transcendent existence, so for me it is. But that does happen. But for most people, the spirit animal is something that just is a metaphor for what they're like. It's not the same thing as a totem from native shamanism. It's not a totem animal, though it can be. There is some overlap there. But it is a representation of yourself, a metaphor for you as a person. So I am the phoenix, a creature of every element, a transcendent bird that sings the praises of God and serves others, right? That lives to serve. So that's me. That's my calling. I have a symbol that goes along with it that is like a phoenix. I have a true name that is similar. I call my true name Ash for short. I can't share. I don't believe in sharing your truest name, your third name that you learn as life evolves, as you feel like an elder and you really master your craft. You may have some name come to you that describes your soul. What would your soul sound like if it were a sound, right? Because it is a vibration. So usually it's a long made-up word that doesn't resemble any real language, and mine is no exception. But I do believe that sharing your true name with others gives people power over you. So I do not share mine. I just refer to my true name as Ash for short. Like if you see me writing it somewhere, it'll say Ash. It's much, much longer than that. You'll never guess it. My first name, Tehillah, means psalm, a song for God. Okay, I am one who cannot stop singing, and I am an eternal servant of God. I am Tehillah, the phoenix, the songbird of transcendence, a rebirth and renewal. All of these are traits that I embody very well. I've had many times in my life where I've almost died or actually died and then come back from that experience and been forever changed. I have a timeless awareness. So for me, the phoenix is my symbol. It's my essence, right? So that is the divine persona. That is the metaphor. That is my soul. That is the part of me that will never change. Even if I reincarnate next life, I could be a man. I could be shorter than I am. Maybe, hopefully, I could look different. Maybe I'll be some blonde person, or maybe I'll be on another planet. Who knows? but I will still be an eternal songbird because my soul is called to service of others. My soul is called to God, and I am one who expresses that soul in song. So that will always be true. I may not be called Tehillah. Tehillah is less perfect of a name. It's more mundane. Firewind, my second name, and that's the name my husband share, and many people in our coven will adopt that name or have adopted that name as their spiritual second name. And that is a thing that happens where people will share a name because they're all in the same spiritual family, and we are very much a tight family here. So if you've been a part of my family for 8 years or whatever, and you start calling yourself a Firewind, that is more than acceptable. But the fire is my husband. He embodies the element fire, and I am the wind. I embody the element wind. You can tell because I talk a lot and I'm very philosophical. But, so that's the idea. So that we're the fire wind clan. Like together we embody fire and wind. And we chose that name and decided we would both change our last names together when we got married because we're very feminist and we just don't like this notion of patriarchal handing of names. And I hope more people will follow us one day and decide to do their own thing. It's not that hard to legally change your name. So I hope more people will consider doing that one day. But yes, it is a name that is designed, and let me go to the next slide before I dive into this further. It is a name that is designed to reflect your impact on the world. So your first name is what people will call you. What is the essence of you in the eyes of others? I am a person who could not stop singing the praises of God. My Rebbitzin tried so hard to make me stop singing, repeatedly being like, that's rude, Tehillah, that's rude, please stop. I couldn't remember. I couldn't stop doing it. I'd go out in the garden and I'd start humming without thinking about it. And so finally she was like, you are a psalm. And that was where I got my name. And that is what people saw me as. I was a psalm. I couldn't stop singing the praises of God. My Firewind is my way of giving back to the world. We teach people to be unique, to be new, to start new things, to rebirth themselves in their spiritual journeys. And that is what Firewind means to my husband and I, because we both chose that last name together and we started our new life together. And we're very big on that theme of rebirth. And that's what fire and wind brings to the world. So that is our leadership name. That is our spiritual coven name and our family name. And then my true name is an embodiment of the deeper parts of me, the parts of me that are very like a phoenix. And that's why Ash for short, right? So ashes, right? Phoenix, rise from the ashes. It's much longer than that, and I'm never going to give it to anyone, so don't ask. But that is where that name comes from as well. It is a description of my soul. What would my soul sound like if it could be heard with your ears? That is the third name. Other parts of the divine self. How do you know your divine self? And the divine self is not based around your ego, like it said on the previous slide. It's not based around your ego. Your divine self, your divine persona is the bridge between the ego. And the ego is your body and your mind. It is everything that is unique to you in this lifetime. Your body and mind as one unit is your ego, your self, your identity. That has to bridge to your soul. And the soul is timeless and formless. So how do you make that bridge? Well, with metaphor, right? Metaphor is the bridge. And that's the divine persona. So the divine persona is not a function of your ego. It is a function of your soul, and it ties into your ego. So your divine persona, your names and things that you take are things that should not change too much over the course of your life. It does happen that people take a name and maybe they weren't quite sure of it, or they weren't quite ready, or they really thought that was the right name, but nobody really pushed back on them to be like, are you sure it's right? So that's why you see me pushing back on people a lot. I'm like, why is that your name? How is that the essence of you? Think of how people are going to call you. People are going to call you that name. Say it out loud 10 times. Sign it on a piece of paper 10 times like you're signing your autograph. I tell people, I challenge them to ensure that it really is the right name, right? So that is something that is very important, and that is the function of a spiritual leader. So if you're solitary, you've chosen a name in the past, it may be so that it wasn't the right name and you need to take a new one when you learn more about yourself. However, if it is the right name for you, it should not change. Like, I left Judaism and became Wiccan once again in full force and committed to a Wiccan path but Tehillah stuck. My Hebrew name is with me even still because I am a song for God. It was so, so right that even changing religions could not undo the rightness of it. And I am very Jewish. We talk about Kabbalah a lot because I really love Kabbalah and I really love God. But, Tehillah stuck for me because because it was the right name. It describes my soul. It is a metaphor for my soul. And it will not change because the soul is timeless. The soul is unchanging. So even if Tehillah, my physical self change over time, I am still Tehillah. So if you're choosing, if you found the right alignments, then it should stay the way it is your entire life, and nothing should ever come along that changes it. If it changes, it just means that you didn't have it right. You had it close or something, and now you need some different version of it to be right. So that's to keep that in mind. Ways to know your divine self. A really good one is to look at your natal star chart correctly using an astronomy tool like Stellarium. We have a course on how to use Stellarium. There's an actual tutorial on how to do it. It's a free open source tool on PC. I think on mobile it might cost $250 or something. But it's a great tool, so it's great to have. And you can plug in your birthday and everything and then look at where the planets actually were at the date and time of your birth. It uses corrective libraries that correct for planetary precession. Those libraries do not exist in astrological sources. They just don't care enough about math or science to know if the planets are in the right place. Or they use solar houses exclusively and they don't actually care how big or varied the sizes of each constellation are. However, I'm a scientist and I studied physics. And when I first came at astrology, I believed it was crap because they all told me I'm a Virgo, and I am not a Virgo. I have a lot of Virgo in me, especially it is my moon, right? My moon is in Virgo, and I feel logically, and logic is an emotional process for me. But my sun is in Leo, and that's the part that never fit. They were trying to reduce me to a single star sign, and I never identified with it, so I just thought it was crap. Then I took a class on astrology with a coven I wanted to join, and I tried to do star charts for 20 random people on Reddit, back when I used to use Reddit, and I only knew their usernames and their birth info. Nothing else about them, not what they looked like, not where they were from in the world, or where they currently, I knew where they were from, I knew where they were born, but I didn't know any other information about where they live or what their culture is like or what their religion are. I didn't know anything about them. And I did those 20 star charts, and all of them were like, well, I guess I could see this part applying. And I was careful. I made sure they were very specific statements. I wanted to know if astrology was valid. So I made very specific statements and predictions, and most of them were struggling to identify with what I gave. So I was like, okay, I guess astrology is bull. I guess that's crap. But I'm a scientist. So I said, okay, is there a circumstance under which astrology could be accurate? And I was like, you know what? I used to use Stellarium to line up telescopes when I did my physics degree. My specialty was astrophysics. I used to use Stellarium to line up the school's telescope, which I had a key for, and I used to live there. Let me try to get the data from Stellarium instead of Cafe Astrology or some other astrology tool that's popular. Let me try to get the data from Stellarium and draw the chart using modern science and astronomy to do so. And then I redid those 20 charts, and every person was like, did you look me up? How did you find me? How do you know this much information about me? How could you possibly know this? People that don't even believe in astrology see me do a star chart reading, and they're like, how could you possibly know this? I've never told it to anyone. I've predicted people getting divorced at a certain time in their life or losing a pet out of nowhere based on how the stars are changing. And people cannot believe how legitimate astrology is. But you have to use correct data. I remember one time I put the sun in the wrong sign because I didn't turn on the constellation boundaries, and the chart was completely wrong. I waited until I forgot it, drew it again, did the reading again, and that time it was completely accurate, and the person was again like, wow, that's spooky how you can know all of that about me. I've now done hundreds of charts, multiple hundreds of charts. I have lost count, readings and such for people, it is incredibly useful to know your astrological information. Knowing the stars under which you were born is just as useful as knowing your genetics and your heritage. It is so critically important. It is the circumstances that existed in the world that allowed for you to exist at all, for you as a unique individual to be born. So you could not be born at a different time or in a different place, or you would be someone else, right? So that does give you a window into your transcendent self. It is a blueprint, and some people develop over time to be different than what's in their chart, right? Just like you can have certain genetics, but that doesn't mean you could have terrible athlete genes and be clumsy as heck, but you can still run half marathons if you want to, right? That can happen. If you train and you work hard, you can do anything, you know, within the laws of physics. So it's a blueprint, just like your physical genetics. It's not a perfectly accurate representation of you. And it's most useful when you're younger and you're not really sure who you are yet, but it is useful when you're older as well, especially if it's just to confirm what you already knew about yourself comes from something else. Like I did a few charts for people recently that were just like, well, we already knew all of this, but now you've got data that proves it. So that is still something. So natal star charts are a really great way. Another way that people know their divine selves is through divination tools, doing divination, interpreting dreams, interpreting visions, doing past life regression. So some people are really influenced by their past lives and by like the memory of who they were before. That's not the case for me. It has been true for Ogun, right? He's very fiery. He remembers being burned in Spain in a past life. So for a lot of people, past life regression is another way to understand the soul because there are some similarities across lifetimes. Feeling the call of a deity, which patron deities you work with, like what shape is your prism, right? Remember the prism metaphor. What shape is your prism? How does does divinity form after it goes through your prism? What does that spectrum look like? That is a representation of you as well. That's a representation of your crystalline structure, if you will, right? How unique you are and the way that your energy vibrates. Your aura is another one, that is usually unique and stays roughly the same across your life, though some people, their aura shifts over time. So that one's less, and it's difficult because some people might have different meanings for blue and green and such things. So I have looked at a person and called them peach, and they have looked at themselves and called themselves green. And that can happen because it's a metaphor for something that's not a real color. Your spirit animal, usually a symbol that goes along with that spirit animal, all of these things, right? So the divine persona is the translation software of the soul to the flesh. It allows for higher truth to be received in packages that the lower self can make sense of. So that is the divine persona and how you come to know it. Usually people say that they discover it. They don't define it. You don't sit down and decide what your divine persona is. If you're sitting down and deciding what it is, you're doing it wrong. Most people say that deity comes to them. They feel called to work with certain deities. They start to see their symbols everywhere. You can't force it. You have to just let it unfold naturally. So that's why becoming a fully realized witch, becoming a Wiccan leader takes time. A necessary ingredient in every recipe is time. That's my own saying, by the way. I like that a lot. But I am a kitchen witch, so that's why I learned that wisdom from being in the kitchen. So you can't force it. You have to meditate and open your mind's eye and be ready to see the world in a transcendent way, and then just kind of wait and let the world tell you when you're ready to know the truth about yourself. No part of the divine persona is about personal preferences. My favorite animal is a dog. I am a very dog-like sometimes in my day-to-day life. I have 3 dogs. I have 3 cats too, but I definitely prefer dogs. And I just love dogs. And some of my dogs go everywhere with me. and I just can't live without them. But I am not a dog. I'm a bird. And as much as I love dogs, I could never be a dog. They're so simple and calm and just like, and I think way too much. So I am a bird. That's my spirit animal. But there's a member in our community who is terrified of snakes. And what is her spirit animal? Her inner animal is a snake. And the snakes always show up to give her omens. She's scared of them. She hates it, but she can't help it. She's a very wise, very knowledgeable person, and she just aligns with the serpent, and there's nothing she can do about it, even if she doesn't like snakes. And she discovered that, by the way. I don't tell people that. I can't tell someone this information. I can look at their aura, and sometimes I can give them some ideas. One of our members, I said he's a bear, and he was like, a bear? I don't think I'm a bear. But now, like 5 years later, he's like, oh, I'm so a bear. So sometimes I can get it, and sometimes it's just something that I can't know if you don't know. You've got to learn it first. But you don't choose which animal to be. People that think that they should be against self-initiation, that they're not unbiased enough to know the truth. I mean, then how do they know themselves? How do they know their spiritual name is correct and it's never going to change over the course of their lives? How do they know their divine persona is a true representation of their higher soul? So I feel like, whether you initiate into a coven or not, the reason for it should not be, I want to be sure that I'm ready. That's not a good reason because you have to know that you're ready. You have to know the truth. You have to know your magic will work. You have to know who you are to be a master of yourself. So you can't just do an initiation using stuff written on a page by someone else and not spend any of that time mastering yourself. So even if you go the coven route, keep that in mind. Some may want to choose an animal or another based on personal preferences. It's very common to see people pick like mythological creatures and like want to feel special, so they choose things that are in their mind special. I think every person is special and every animal is special, so I think that's a little bit silly. You should be you. You should be who you are, not whatever you think you ought to be. Just accept who you are. I think that's way more important than whatever else. Everyone is important. Everyone weaves into this tapestry. And without every person being an individual that is unique and distinct from each other, we don't have a beautiful tapestry. We have, brown or something. So you get a beautiful tapestry when everyone is most unique to them, and in their own way. So keep in mind also that acolytes will usually have a name. They'll usually have, they'll know their aura color. Maybe they'll know their spirit animal. They'll have their first name. That's about it. That's most of what an acolyte knows about themselves. We say that they're a master of themselves. What we mean by that is that they are effective. They're not doing things that are against their own success. They're not overdosing on drugs. They're not not getting their work done because they're too busy procrastinating or obsessing over the wrong things or following around the wrong people. They're empowered. They own themselves and they can be true to themselves in every moment of every day. If you can do that, then you're an acolyte and you know yourself well enough to know what people should call you and how you are called and how your soul is represented in the greater consciousness of the world, then you're an acolyte. Leaders will know their second name. How do they impact the world? Their patron deities are things that leaders know. So sometime between acolyte and leader, you find your deities. You know your elemental alignments. Some people will know the elemental alignments and the polarities as an acolyte because they're very intuitive, or they've been solitary for a long time. And some people won't discover that until after they initiate into Wicca and they're still learning about themselves. The symbol is something that whatever symbol that you use to represent you is usually something that you develop in between acolyte and leadership. And any other unique expression of you in your religious path will form after you initiate. You don't have to wait to initiate because you're not perfectly aware of your divine persona. Only elders are truly masters of themselves. So that is the process of eldering. You have nothing left to learn about yourself. You're an elder. Okay, so that's the difference. Now, I want to spend a slide talking about what you do if you can't conform to Wiccan traditions because you live in the Southern Hemisphere and summer happens in the winter. Well, most people in the Southern Hemisphere, they will just swap the equinoxes, swap the solstices. So Yule is in the summer and Litha is in the winter, which for them, rather, Yule is in the winter and Litha is in the summer, but it's just the opposite. So they will do Yule in June and Litha in December. They just swap it. They just make it match the seasons, because in the Southern Hemisphere, you still have the 4 seasons, or the 8. We call it 8 seasons in Wicca because we divide each season into 2, and we have 8 Sabbats. Some people, however, do not have 4 seasons in a year, 8 Sabbat seasons. They have a wet season and a dry season, or they don't really have weather at all. And in that case, you may have to draw your own cycle. You may have to define your own traditions that worship nature in your environment. Some people will even invent their own mythology in order to explain those changing seasons. It's also common to see people borrow from their local mythologies, right? So I've seen people who are in Africa use African deities and African mythologies, and they are Wiccan. They believe in duality of deity and the prism principle and the Wiccan Rede, but their way of worshiping nature and which traditions they have is different. And they may still celebrate holidays from their heritage tradition, but in a way that feels Wiccan. And they'll do spells and they'll do magic and they'll do invocations of divinity in a Wiccan way, but just with different deities than are traditionally Wiccan. So traditions, they are important. They're important for any religion. A lot of Wiccans today were not raised Wiccan. Even those of us who were raised in witchcraft, we have some traditions, but maybe not enough to have that identity as a Wiccan witch. So defining traditions that you can share with your family and your loved ones is very important for you to feel like a spiritual being. To start, you can explore existing traditions, read all the books. You can attend group rituals. You can online or in person. You can observe your natural surroundings, like I said, and see how they differ. And you can just try new holiday activities every time it comes up and just do new things until you learn. Another great book for this topic is this one, Crafting Wiccan Traditions by Raven Grimassi. And he was the one who started the Aridian tradition, but he was very big on doing your own thing and just, following in traditions that were maybe not conforming because you are not conforming, or because you maybe lived in a past life, you are a different culture and you feel very drawn to that, and your patron deities are not from your current heritage based on your current physical DNA. And he says, that's fine. Don't appropriate, don't profit, but authentically borrow then from these other traditions if that's what you need to be a divine person who connects with divinity. So he'll say, some Wiccans go outside of specific cultures and create consort pairs that are not from the same region. One example is creating a consort pair with an Aegean Mediterranean goddess and a Celtic god, or vice versa. In choosing this approach, care should be given to understanding the myths and legends of each deity before mating them. This includes looking at the totem animals associated with each in order to be certain that neither deity is offended, but do not need to be concerned about the compatibility of the animal totems, such as a goddess associated with cats and a god associated with wolves. The primary concern is not to include a totem that is specifically referenced as offensive in the myth of any specific deity. In order to do that, you have to understand the deities very well. And that's why you'll see in the rituals that we have, in example rituals on our Covenant of the Open Mind website, covenantoftheopenmind.org, I have a lot of example rituals, and some of them are using languages, like the ritual to Tote has Egyptian printed there, the ritual to Ninlil has Sumerian. So, I am so big on authentically doing something. So if you're working in Santeria, that's a common one in America. If you're working with hoodoo or voodoo, and you're not from that heritage culture, well, still learn some Spanish, still study what's it called? Creole. Still study what it's like. Go to New Orleans and be around that culture and just experience what that magic is really like, and make sure that you're doing it as authentically as you can, because it's more powerful that way. Like, it only benefits you as well to be authentic, but it also ensures that these traditions are upheld in some way, are kept sacred, are treated as sacred, and that's very important. Another excerpt from his book that I wanted to look at. Another thing that he said is, what happens to, an ancient idea is that what happens to the deity eventually happens to its followers. So some people believe, that if they work with certain deities, that whatever the story says is going to happen to the deity is going to be a metaphor for what happens to the person who works with them. So that's something to keep in mind if you're borrowing outside of your traditions. There's different kinds of models that you can use. You can create a lunar model that does rituals associated with the moon. Dark moon, waxing moon, full moon, waning moon. When do you do the rituals? Do you do rituals on the dark moon? Do you do rituals on the full moon? When do you do them? Nobody agrees. Do you have to wear certain kinds of clothing to do ritual at different times of the moon phase? Then there's, solar versions of that as well. There's a bunch of stuff in this book that I really think, if you're trying to craft your own tradition, if you're trying to be nonconformist anti-Wiccan, this is a great book to read. Another example is that they have different kinds of gods, right? So there's slain gods, there's gods of blood and flesh, there's gods that involve animal sacrifice, there's gods that are vegetarian, there's gods that represent hangings, gods that represent, so there's different, even within like Chthonic, death-based deities, there's different kinds of deities that have different myths associated with them, that have different values and this sort of thing. So that's a really great idea to read. And another thing that you can do is, at the back of Open Minded Wicca, I have a section on crafting your own traditions. And in here, it's an actual worksheet that will step you through finding things in your own natural environment that you can use, right? So purification, usually you use sage. Well, maybe you don't grow sage. Maybe sage can't grow where you live. So what is your flora? What exists in your space that could be used for purification? That's your tradition. Cleansings, usually use sage, rose, or lavender. Maybe those can't grow where you live, or you can't find those. Well, what flora do you have that would be like sage, rose, and lavender that's used traditionally for cleansing? There's different kinds of wood. There's different kinds of resins, okay? So that is part of the worksheet. What is your heritage? What deities resonate the most with you? If you don't feel attached to your birth heritage, why not? Maybe there's a past life memory that influences you. Explore languages, cultures, and myths you associate with. What deities, languages, and cultures stick with you the most? What rituals or traditions from your upbringing could you repurpose to be Wiccan? And then I also have a section for forming a lineage, right? So the administrative considerations. Do you plan to host rituals? Where do you plan to congregate? Do you want your members to initiate? If so, how and when and what time of the year? Are you going to charge dues because you have bills you have to pay as a coven? Like if you need to have a ritual space, maybe you need your members to pay you, not for profit, but just so you have enough money to cover the space, right? They do that even in churches. You go to church, you have to pay because, or give donations because they need to pay for the electricity, pay for the air conditioning, pay for the pastor, right? So this is why religious organizations are monetized even when they're not for profit. So keep that in mind. Do you plan to gift things to your new members, right? So that's all in here. And you can use that worksheet. There's also one for beliefs and practices on the next page. So if you need to explore non-conforming, you can easily do that with the worksheet in my book. And if you want examples of how open-minded Wicca conducts itself, and some of our actual Book of Shadows is printed right here. A lot of it is written by my husband and is taken from our Coven Book of Shadows. And some of it is from my own personal Book of Shadows. And that's why they look slightly different. And all of it is interesting stuff. And you can see my notes, my astrology notes. This is what I look at if I am interpreting a star chart. See that flat wheel? This is my numerological system, which I found out more recently is based on graph theory. I apparently have an exceptional logical and mathematical understanding of the world, and I never knew it because I'm dissociative, so I'm bad at symbols and math and memorizing things and memorizing rules and definitions. So I'm actually exceptional at math, but I'm also terrible at it. So I learned that more recently, that my numerological system is based on graph theory is very interesting to me. I also provide the Gardnerian numerological system, which I don't have as much success with personally, but it's there, and I did take note of that and write it all down. Rune meanings and cartomancy is provided. So anything that you could possibly. Oh, also our we have an address that we use in every ritual, because we do an open circle that is open to anyone across space and time. If you join in one of our rituals, even if we're not doing it live, you can still tap into our energy, even if you're doing it 3 years later, because we do an open circle. In our open circle, we say, "Come, my sisters and brothers, children, fathers and mothers, and all other kin of heart and reed, come, come to the dance. Where souls collide, we stand, attend and command. Be present, all who will it, be blessed. Come, any and all in need, rest upon my hearth. Be cleansed and grow toward what you seek. Be blessed and be welcome." So that's the address that we say when we open the circle. And it's very specific phrasing. Notice that it's any and all in need, come rest upon my hearth. Anyone who comes in love and light, right? Any other kin of heart and reed. So we're not inviting in the people that would mean us harm. They can watch our ritual all they want, and they'll never feel the energy involved. And that is why it's very specific, very particular phrasing. You'll see all of the stuff that I do is very highly ordered. Our charge of the goddess has a very unique syllable structure and rhyming pattern, because I understand the nature of divinity exceptionally well, and I just want to make sure that anyone who's using these things on their own in their own solitary way is not going to get themselves into trouble working with some aspect of divinity that is not really divine, or that it is difficult for people who are teaching themselves and being solitary to know if something is what they say it is, if a source of energy is what it's supposed to be. And that is the reason why many people do not believe in teaching Wicca or witchcraft in mass, and why many were hesitant to write books in the first place. And then I read all those books and I was like, oh, I see why people have a hard time with this. And I'm a writer and I'm an intuitive person. So I did all that hard work so that if you guys are worried about that kind of thing, you can just make use of what I have done and use that in your own covens and form your own covens. And you feel free to call them open-minded. We do not care. We are happy to share with all of you. And I'm so glad that you've made it to the end of my 2-hour-long final lecture. But if there's any further learning I can do to help any of you, please feel free to reach out, covenantoftheopenmind@gmail.com, or join our Open-Minded Crossroads. I'm not the best at replying to emails. We get a lot of emails. Sorry. Often I have a lot of email addresses as well. I'm extremely busy. You can ask anyone. But if you join our Open-Minded Crossroads server on Discord, that's the name of the app. If you join our community there, I will be the most responsive. I can't ignore it. I cannot respond to people. So that's the best way to get in touch with me directly. Leave a comment if you have any questions. The homework this time, it's chapter 9, the second half. And the appendices and other things, feel free to flip through. There's some exercises and other things, same as usual, but none of this stuff should be necessary to initiate. So it doesn't matter that I'm only a few days before Samhain, because you shouldn't need it in order to be ready to initiate. This is like further learning and further info, and how do you be your own kind of Wiccan witch? Well, now you know. So how do you be your own kind of Wiccan witch? How do you be Wiccan? How do you be a witch? You seek the mysteries, ever wary of fullness and growing daft. Anytime you think you're full and you can't eat another bite of mysterious knowledge, wait. Feel good in that headspace, feel good with that full belly, and wait, and you'll be hungry once more before long. That's my metaphor. I'm a kitchen witch, so I use a lot of cooking metaphors. Remember that time is a necessary ingredient in every recipe. So if you are doing your own thing, you'll know when you're ready, and you should just open your mind and learn all the knowledge you can learn and read all the books you can read, and then wait, and it will come to you. Your deities will come to you. Your name will come to you. Will all come to you, and you'll just, when it does, you'll get goosebumps and you'll feel like, oh my gosh, that's it. And that is the way to learn how to be a witch. That is how you do it. Seek, seek, seek. And when you can't think, and when you think you can't seek anymore, wait and something will come along. For me, recently, I thought, I'm an elder high priestess. I mastered myself. I know everything there is to know about Kabbalah and God and all this stuff. I was like, I know everything. Life is boring. I can't. But then one of my students comes back into my life. I treat them like a student, but I don't know if he sees it exactly that way. But someone who I was influential in the course of his life left for a while to do his own thing and comes back, my peer, and he's ready to teach me too. And now I am seeking once more. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing when your students or your people that were influenced by you become your peers and start to teach you in return. That is the most rewarding thing there is when you're a teacher or parent. Learn from your children, learn from everything, and never ever stop learning. And that is how you become a witch. So that's our Wicca and Witchcraft course. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you got this far, then I commend you. I don't know how you could listen to me speak for so long, but you have all the knowledge that I have, and now you are a master of Wicca, right? Well, maybe give it some time, but good luck in your journey. Thank you for joining us. And from everyone here at the Coven of the Open Mind, blessed be.